And so once the ancestors to the chloroplasts and the mitochondria were ingested by the ancestral host, those ancestral prokaryotes became the mitochondria and the chloroplasts of the first protists. So the protists then were the predecessors for the living protists of today and the ancestor to all of the other eukaryotes, that's the plants, fungi, and the animals. So within the eukaryotes, the eukaryotic organisms, the protists are the oldest. So the protists are pretty varied. In fact, they are so varied that they are no longer considered a true taxonomic category. They used to be called and grouped into kingdom Protista, but that's actually not correct. The evidence clearly shows that where's my cursor? Here we go. That the protists actually belong to multiple kingdoms, and that's still being clarified. So recent genetic and structural studies show that it's not a unified kingdom, and some of the protists are actually more closely related to fungi or plants or animals than they are related to each other. So it's a very varied group, and again, the exact taxonomic structure of the protist is still being figured out. So again, the hypotheses about the phylogeny, the evolutionary history, and the classification of them, the protists, is being determined with new research and new discoveries. There's a lot of work to be done with this group. So protists obtain nutrients in a number of ways. There are some photosynthetic protists, the autotrophs. So remember, if you're an autotroph, you can produce your own nutrients, usually through photosynthesis. So the autotrophic photosynthetic protists are called the algae. Some are unicellular, some are colonial, and some are multicellular. What they basically have in common is that they are green or kind of gold in color. Heterotrophs or heterotrophic protists are like you and I. They acquire food from other organisms. They're consumers. So parasitic heterotrophs, that's a subgroup. They derive their nutrition from a living host. So for example, there's a parasitic protist called trypanosome. So the trypanosomes infect blood and cause African sleeping sickness. And this is a trypanosome shown next to red blood cells to show that they're relatively small, single-celled, but cause some serious disease. And then there are some protists that are mixotroph, meaning that they can photosynthesize, but also they can be heterotrophic, have autotrophy and heterotrophy in the same individual. So for example, Euglena can photosynthesize if the nutrients and sunlight's available for that, or it can switch to being a consumer and being heterotrophic if say carbon dioxide and light are limited, but other nutrients are available. Euglena can shift between being heterotrophic or autotrophic. That's pretty amazing, really, for a simple single-celled organism. So protists inhabit many habitats. Usually they're found in wet or aquatic places. So in lakes, rivers, and in oceans and or ponds. Here's a picture of the Baltic Sea, just north of Germany, between Germany and the Scandinavian countries. And this green big patch that you see is a big bloom of an aquatic ocean group of protists. They can be very abundant. Some can be found almost anywhere where there's moisture, even within a living host, like in damp soil or leaf litter in terrestrial habitats. And then some live within hosts of organisms in a symbiotic relationship. So a symbiont is usually a protist or a bacterium that will live inside a host organism, and a symbiosis again is a close association, and usually it's beneficial to both organisms. So in this figure here we have a termite. A termite ingests wood, eats wood particles, but the termite itself doesn't have enzymes that can break down the wood to release nutrients. Within the animal, within its gut, it has microbes. Some of them are protists that can actually break down the wood. So that provides energy for the microbes, and some materials that get released, like some sugars, then provide nutrients for the host termite. And then that's the way that the termite actually obtains energy from wood. It obtains the energy indirectly. So the energy produced by the breakdown of wood by the protist is able to supply the nutrients for the host, in this case the termite. Right, so it's a symbiotic organism. And again, symbiosis is a close association between different species. So one group of protists are the protozoans. So the protozoans are protists that live primarily by ingesting food. So most protozoans are heterotrophs, and that's how, again, heterotrophy is a way of obtaining nutrients. So by consuming something else, for example. Sorry, here my cursor is acting up. Here's an amoeba, and it's ingesting a couple of protists that look like paramecium, and they decided to wake up too late, and they're being ingested and will be consumed for energy. So an amoeba is a protozoan, which is a type of heterotrophic protist. There are flagellates. So flagellates are protozoans with flagella, and they're typically free-living, but some can be parasites. So free-living meaning it's a non-parasitic organism. So for example, Giardia, which happens to be a parasite, is a flagellated protozoan, and it can attach itself to the digestive tract of an organism, usually a vertebrate animal like a dog, a cat, or a human, a cow, and cause serious diarrhea to the animal, and beyond that, serious illness. So other flagellates, meaning protozoans with flagella, can be symbiotes with their host partners. So those termite protozoan or protists symbionts that help digest cellulose, wood materials into simpler molecules, providing nutrients with the host termite. Those are actually flagellated protozoan protists. So continuing with the protozoans, so the amoebas are characterized by a flexible, movable body shape, even though it should probably say cell shape. Again, it's single-celled organism, and they can move and capture prey and feed that way through the extension of these pseudopodia. Pseudo meaning false, podia meaning feet. These aren't real feet. It's an extension of the cell plasma membrane, but those extensions are called pseudopodia. And we'll see them here as this video continues. So see that extension wraps around, the pseudopodia emerge, boom, and now the engulfed ciliates, the engulfed protists in here are engulfed in a vacuole, which becomes a feeding vacuole because these things will be digested with digestive enzymes. Another type of protozoans are the apicomplexans. Api means end or tip, and complexa means that there's a structure, a complex at their tip, at their apex. So this modified structure at the apex is specialized, used to penetrate into host cells and or tissues by a parasite. For example, Plasmodium is an apicomplexan, and the Plasmodium is transferred into humans by the vector, which is a mosquito in this case. So again, the vector is something that will transmit something, usually a pathogen or a disease. So the vector mosquito in biting you, if the mosquito has bitten someone who has Plasmodium, it gets into the mosquito's gut. The mosquito bites you, takes a blood meal, but can transfer the Plasmodium protozoan into you, and then the Plasmodium is an apicomplexan, and the Plasmodium can enter into our red blood cells, causing malaria, which actually kills millions of people around the world. It's not really a problem in the United States, but in some of the tropical countries, malaria is a serious problem. So a little video here on how amoeba use pseudopodium to move. There's no audio, but you can see that this is a single-celled organism, and the amoebas can move their single cell around with the use of these extensions, the pseudopodia, either just for movement, but also for capturing food. You can see that that's the cellular material that's moving within the cell. And remember, way back when we talked about cells, anything that's causing movement is associated with the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton is pushing the plasma membrane forward in the pseudopodia, and this material moving within the cell, that's the cytoplasmic material. See how some of it moves faster than other parts? Again, that's part of the cytoskeleton structure. Internally, it's moving that material forward, pulling it from back of the cell. So continuing with our protozoans, there are ciliated protozoans. These are protists that have short extensions called cilia. The really long extensions are flagella, but just like the flagella, the cilia have extensions of the cytoskeleton, and that they allow the protist to move, like paramecium can zip through the water, or the cilia will beat and move, and if the cell is stationary, if the ciliate protozoan is stationary, the cilia create a current of water moving, hopefully, for the ciliate, moving food particles into the feeding groove, which is sometimes called an oral groove, and into a mouth, even though it's not a real mouth because it's only one cell, and having that material move into its cell to digest that material to obtain nutrients. So most of the ciliates are free-living, non-parasitic. They're just out being heterotrophic, feeding on other things. But again, some can be mixotrophic, like euglena. So a real common one is the paramecium, which is a common freshwater ciliate protozoan. So here's paramecium moving through ciliary action, or through the action of the cilia. They're really short, so you can't really see it. It's just kind of like the fuzzy border. But notice it can move, glide around, go forwards, go backwards, twirl around in the water column, basically just looking for food. Another view. It's kind of a soft, smooth gliding motion, and some of the ciliated protozoans can actually move pretty rapidly, pretty quick in the water. Okay, let's move on to slime molds, which actually used to be classified as fungi, but now we know that they are a type of protists. So slime molds are actually multicellular protists. They're related to the amoebas, and they actually feed on dead plant material, very fungus-like in how they feed.